Have you ever wondered how the Vikings survived the harsh Scandinavian winters? When it comes to everyday life, we often imagine warriors sleeping on the ground, covered only by a skin. But this is not true. In fact, staying warm and comfortable, especially during long nights, was not just a matter of convenience, but a real necessity, and the Vikings knew how to do it. Their methods were simple but surprisingly effective, based on a deep understanding of natural materials and ingenuity. It was these secrets that allowed them to conserve their strength for sea voyages, building dracars, and settling new lands. Scandinavian nights, especially in the winter months, could be deadly cold, and even a warrior's robust health could not withstand prolonged exposure to dampness and frost. Therefore, setting up a sleeping place in a longhouse or on board a ship required the same attention and skill as forging a sword or building a dwelling. The Vikings developed a whole system of insulation and comfort, using only what the harsh northern nature provided them. They turned straw, coarse wool, and durable animal skins into a multi-layered wind-proof shelter capable of retaining the precious heat of the human body. These simple but ingenious techniques allowed them not only to survive in the cold, but also to thrive. Watch the video to the end to find out how straw, which seems ordinary at first glance, was turned into the most effective insulator, and what the true cost of sheep farming was for the survival of an entire settlement. What if I told you that the greatest warriors of the North slept on what we throw away? It is important to understand that in the Viking era, there were no mattresses, let alone central heating, and the floors in longhouses were made of earth or stone. That is why straw, or more precisely, dry cereal stalks, became the basis for creating a warm and hygienic sleeping place. The straw was collected after the harvest, thoroughly dried, and laid in a thick layer directly on the floor along the walls of the longhouse, thus creating an insulating foundation for the future bed. Such a bed was surprisingly practical and had several key advantages. First of all, straw is an excellent natural insulator. The air trapped between the hollow stalks prevented the heat from the human body from escaping into the cold floor. In addition, straw was an easily accessible and renewable material that could be found in almost every settlement after the harvest. This material was also quite elastic, which provided relative softness, cushioning the unevenness of the floor and making sleep less harsh. One of the most important aspects of using straw was its hygiene. Unlike a permanent mattress, straw bedding could be changed regularly, which helped to combat dampness, insects, and unpleasant odors. Used damp straw was simply thrown away and replaced with fresh straw, which was critical for health and overall comfort in the cramped living space. However, straw had a disadvantage. Over time, it became compacted and accumulated moisture. The Vikings solved this problem by periodically fluffing or beating the straw layer with special sticks and supplementing it with fresh material. This care allowed them to maintain the optimal thickness and airiness of the bedding, preserving its thermal insulation properties. Sleeping on straw bedding also had important social significance. In large communal Viking houses, sleeping places were often located along the walls, and the straw itself covered a large area, creating a single sleeping space for the whole family or community. This contributed to additional mutual warming and strengthened the sense of community in harsh conditions. All this suggests that the Vikings valued comfort no less than we do, but their concept of comfort was different. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about how such simple things affected the fighting spirit of warriors? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the military tricks of the past. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Vikings made their beds incredibly soft? On top of the straw base, there was always a second, softer, and more valuable layer, and that's where wool came into play. Wool products were one of the most important resources in Scandinavian life, serving not only as clothing and sails, but also as the basis for creating a truly comfortable bed. Wool, like straw, is an excellent insulator, but its main advantage is its softness, which made sleep much more restful. The Vikings did not just spread sheepskins on the floor, they also used coarse but warm woolen fabric to sew primitive mattresses, stuffing them with sheep's wool or moss. These woolen bags not only retained heat, but also provided additional cushioning, creating a smoother and softer surface for the body than straw alone. Special attention was paid to the production of woolen blankets and quilts, which were an integral part of the bedding set. These blankets, often thick and tightly woven, provided an upper insulating layer, protecting the sleeper from drafts and the night chill. The production of such a blanket was a long and laborious process, starting with shearing the sheep and ending with spinning and weaving. Wool was also used to make primitive pillows. These pillows were small, stuffed with wool fleece or seabird down, if it was possible to obtain it. The pillow served not only for the comfort of the head, but also to keep the neck warm, which was important for preventing colds. The quality of the wool was of great importance. The Vikings valued wool from local breeds of sheep, which was fatty and coarse, but had high water-repellent properties. Even when slightly wet, such wool continued to retain heat effectively. Wool processing was one of the main domestic crafts. Women spent hours spinning, creating threads for weaving. The density and weaving method of woolen fabrics for bedding differed from those used for clothing, as maximum thermal insulation was required. But wool was not the only material used for the top layer of bedding. Ready to find out how the fiercest predator of the north helped the Vikings sleep soundly? Read on to the next chapter to learn how sea animal skins were turned into the most coveted blankets. You've definitely never heard about this unique secret. If straw was the foundation and wool was the soft layer, then animal skins, especially those obtained from the sea, were the pinnacle of luxury and practicality in Viking bedding. Unlike sheep's wool, the skins of marine mammals such as seals and walruses had unique properties that made them ideal for protection against the harshest cold. These skins were not just blankets, they were waterproof, incredibly warm, and served as a symbol of successful hunting and prosperity for the Vikings. Seal skins were especially prized. Their fur is short and very dense, and underneath it is a thick layer of fat that made the skin virtually impervious to moisture and wind. Spread over a wool mattress, such a skin served as an ideal top cover, creating a thermal insulation barrier that did not let in the cold or let out the heat. The process of processing such skins was laborious and required special skill. The skin had to be cleaned of flesh and fat residues and then carefully tanned. For this purpose, tanning agents were used, often obtained from tree bark or even from the animal's own fat. Only proper tanning could keep the skin soft and supple, preventing it from hardening. Tanned hides were incredibly strong and durable. They could serve one family for several generations, becoming a true family heirloom. This material was also quite light, which was important when bedding had to be quickly gathered and taken on a journey. For travel, especially by sea, the skins of marine animals were simply indispensable. On board a drakkar, where the deck was constantly flooded with cold water, only such skins could provide a dry and warm shelter for sleeping. They served as both a mattress and a blanket, protecting the warrior from dampness and wind. In addition to seals, the Vikings also used the skins of cattle and deer. Deer skins were distinguished by their long, hollow hair, which retained air well, creating an air cushion. Such skins were more suitable for bedding, as they were softer. These skins were the final, most important layer in the sleeping system. They provided dryness, warmth, and ultimately restful and restorative sleep, which was vital for the harsh warriors of the north. What you are about to learn will change your perception of Viking sea voyages. Viking sea voyages, often lasting weeks or months, required an even more sophisticated approach to sleep and warmth. There were no separate cabins or stoves on board a drakkar, and space was limited. Therefore, the Vikings turned the very structure of their legendary ship into part of their sleeping system, using it to protect themselves from the elements. Sleeping quarters were usually arranged on the deck or on special platforms in the central part of the drakkar. The outer side of the ship, its sides, served as an improvised wall, protecting them from the wind and spray. At night, the warriors lay down, huddling close together, which provided additional collective warmth. The most important element of the bed on a drakkar was the awning or tent, which was installed in the central part. This awning was made of thick woolen fabric, or ideally grease-soaked fabric or skins. It created a closed, relatively dry, and wind-protected space where several people could sleep at once. Inside the tent, a multi-layered floor was laid on the deck. The bottom layer could be made of spare sails or heavy woolen fabric, which insulated against the cold and wet deck. The warriors' personal sleeping gear was laid on top of this layer, woolen blankets and skins. The skins of marine animals were worth their weight in gold, especially on sea voyages. Their waterproofness was critically important, as seawater and condensation soaked through ordinary fabric. A warrior covered with a seal skin could sleep relatively dry, even in stormy conditions. Another trick was to use a personal chest with belongings as a pillow. The warrior would rest his head on the chest where his valuables and clothes were stored. This not only provided a headrest, but also served as a kind of lock, protecting his property from theft. But even the most ingenious sea tent is useless without the most important thing: raw materials. In the next chapter, we will delve into the process that provided the Vikings with everything they needed, from clothing to bedding. Are you ready to learn more about Scandinavian craftsmanship? What if I told you that one of the tools of survival was patience? Creating a high-quality skin for bedding was an art that required tremendous patience and knowledge, and was as complex as blacksmithing. A raw hide, freshly removed from an animal, is completely unusable. It quickly hardens, rots, and becomes a breeding ground for bacteria. The task of tanning was to make it soft, strong, water-resistant, and durable, turning it into a valuable and indispensable material. The process began with the careful removal of fat and flesh residues using sharp scrapers. This stage required precision so as not to damage the skin itself. The slightest traces of organic matter could lead to rotting and spoilage of the entire material. After cleaning, the skin was tanned. For this, the Vikings used natural tanning agents. Most often, oak, spruce, or willow bark, which are rich in tannins, were used. The bark was crushed, mixed with water, and the skin was soaked in the resulting solution for weeks, and sometimes months. One of the oldest and most common methods was fat tanning. The skin was treated with animal brains, fat, or fish oil. These organic fats were rubbed into the skin, penetrating the fibers and making it soft and waterproof. This method was especially popular for the skins of marine animals. After tanning, the skin had to be thoroughly dried. Drying was done slowly, in the shade, to avoid hardening and cracking. The skin was then kneaded and stretched by hand or with special tools. This stage, called softening, was the most labor-intensive, as it required constant effort to achieve the desired flexibility. Skins intended for bedding were usually left with the fur on, which maximized heat retention. For clothing, the fur could be shorn off, or the skin could be used without it. When the Vikings were on a campaign, their sleeping system underwent changes. What if I told you that even on a campaign, the Vikings tried not to sleep on the bare ground? Outside the walls of the longhouse, during a rest stop, they needed to set up the warmest and driest bed possible in the shortest amount of time. The ability to quickly create a comfortable place to rest was part of their military art. First, they cleared the area where they would sleep to avoid uneven ground and rocks. Then, just like at home, they created an insulating bottom layer. To do this, they used natural materials that could be found nearby. The most common material was spruce or pine needles. The needles not only provided softness, but also had a pleasant resinous smell that helped repel insects. A thick layer of needles scattered on the ground was an excellent natural insulator. If there were no pine needles, dry leaves, moss, or thin spruce branches were used. Moss, in particular, has excellent thermal insulation properties and could be found in abundance in Scandinavian forests. Personal woolen blankets and skins were spread over the natural bedding. Warriors made their beds using their personal belongings. A shield could serve as protection from the wind, and a rolled-up cloak or bag could serve as a pillow. The location of the sleeping place relative to the fire was very important. Too close was dangerous, too far away was cold. Experienced warriors positioned themselves so that the heat from the fire reached their feet, but did not overheat them. Sleep on a campaign was always shallow. The warriors slept in shifts, and some of them were always on duty to provide protection against a sudden attack. Their sleeping gear had to allow them to jump up instantly and engage in battle. In the next chapter, we will delve into the process that provided the Vikings with everything they needed, from clothing to bedding. Are you ready to learn more about Scandinavian craftsmanship? In addition to the main materials, the Vikings actively used auxiliary natural materials to improve the thermal insulation of their beds. These additions were not as obvious as straw or skins, but they played an important role in creating a dry and warm bed. Their use demonstrates the Vikings' meticulousness in matters of survival and their deep knowledge of natural resources. One such material was moss, especially sphagnum moss. This moss has an exceptional ability to absorb moisture, making it ideal for use as a pad under wool mattresses. Moss helped wick excess moisture away from the body and bedding, keeping them dry, which was critical for warmth. Moss was also used to stuff primitive mattresses or pillows. Being light and soft, it provided additional cushioning. It was collected, dried, and mixed with wool shavings to reduce the consumption of more expensive wool material. In coastal areas and on islands, the Vikings had access to a valuable but rare material: eider down. The eider is a large sea duck, whose down is considered one of the best natural insulators in the world. Collecting this down did not require killing the bird. It was gathered from nests. Pillows and small quilts stuffed with eider down were incredibly light and warm. They were the ultimate luxury and were only available to the richest or most skilled hunters. Such items were often traded. More common bird down, collected from other species of birds, was also used. It was less effective than eider down, but still provided good insulation. The down had to be thoroughly cleaned and dried to avoid unpleasant odors and spoilage. Dry seaweed could also be used as additional insulation. In coastal settlements, seaweed, especially after drying, was used to stuff mattresses. It was easily accessible but tended to wear out quickly and accumulate odors. These auxiliary materials show that the Vikings did not neglect any natural resources. They created a complex, multi-layered bedding system where each component served a unique function. Straw provided insulation from the floor, wool provided softness and warmth, skins provided protection from moisture and wind, and moss and down provided additional dryness and light warmth. Although Viking beds were primarily functional, they did not neglect aesthetics. In their world, where beauty and craftsmanship were valued as highly as bravery in battle, even simple blankets and bedspreads became objects of art and self-expression. The colors and patterns on woolen items were not just decoration. They conveyed information about the status, wealth, and taste of the owner. Woolen blankets, which served as the top layer of the bed, were often dyed with natural dyes. The Vikings extracted dyes from plants, roots, and lichens. For example, yellow was obtained from birch bark, red from madder roots, and blue from woad. The colors were not always bright, as the dyeing process was complicated, but they were deep and durable. The more effort that went into dyeing, the more valuable the product was considered to be. Bright, saturated colors, especially red and blue, indicated high social status. Bedspreads decorated with patterns made using weaving or embroidery techniques were particularly valuable. These patterns often consisted of geometric ornaments, abstract motifs, or stylized images of animals and mythological scenes. The patterns also had symbolic meaning. They could serve as talismans, bringing good luck and protecting the sleeper from evil spirits. For example, images of dragons or wolves could symbolize strength and protection. In wealthy families, bedding, if you could call it that, could include fine linen or hemp fabrics that served as sheets. Linen was more labor-intensive to produce than wool, and its presence in the home was also a sign of wealth. The aesthetics of the bed were closely linked to the overall aesthetics of the longhouse. Bright, patterned blankets and bedspreads added color and warmth to the dark, smoky space, making it more comfortable and livable. Thus, Viking beds were not simply piles of materials, but complex products that combined high functionality with cultural and aesthetic value. The skill required to create these items was as important as the skill required in battle. In communal living quarters without sophisticated ventilation systems, hygiene and bedding care were just as important a ritual as bedding arrangement. Regular and thorough care prevented the spread of parasites, combated dampness, and kept materials fresh, which was vital for the health of all inhabitants of the house. The main element, the straw bedding, was changed most often. The frequency depended on the season and the availability of fresh straw, but ideally this happened several times a year. Old, matted and damp straw was discarded, often used as compost or bedding for livestock. Before laying fresh straw, the floor was thoroughly swept and, if possible, treated with strong-smelling herbs such as mint or wormwood. This served as a natural insect repellent. Fresh straw was not only soft, but also smelled pleasant. Wool blankets and skins required more careful care, as they were valuable and durable. They were regularly taken outside to be beaten to remove dust and aired in the fresh air. Beating was done with special sticks. In winter, snow was used to clean skins and blankets. Snow absorbed odors and removed dirt without requiring water. Woolen items were spread out on clean snow and then thoroughly beaten. This was an effective and affordable cleaning method. Wool and skin products were periodically inspected for insect damage. If damage was found, it was immediately repaired with darning or patches. A quality product was too valuable to throw away. Moisture was the main enemy of warmth. The Vikings tried to avoid moisture buildup in their bedding. This was achieved by thoroughly drying items by the hearth and regularly airing them out. Bedding care was a collective responsibility in which all family members participated. Children could help gather and dry herbs, while women were responsible for sewing and darning. The Viking bed system had a direct influence on Scandinavian architecture, particularly on the layout of their famous longhouses. Understanding how the Vikings arranged their sleeping quarters helps explain why their dwellings were designed in this way, combining common areas and individual needs. Sleeping quarters were not just part of the house, they were an integral, structural part of it. Viking longhouses, which could accommodate several families, had a common central area with a hearth where food was prepared and people gathered to socialize. However, raised platforms or platforms were located around the perimeter of the house, which served as the main sleeping area. These platforms were raised about 30-50 centimeters above the earthen floor, which was critical for insulation. By raising the bed above the coldest level of the house, the Vikings significantly reduced heat loss and protected themselves from dampness. The space under the platforms was often used to store straw, dry grass, or even small livestock, which provided additional insulation from below. Thus, the platform was multifunctional. It served as both a bed and a storage space. The construction of the walls of a longhouse, often double with a layer of moss or peat, was also designed to retain heat. This insulating wall, next to which the sleeping places were located, further protected sleepers from external cold and drafts. The interior zoning of the longhouse was designed with collective sleeping in mind. Families slept together, and their sleeping areas were often separated by low partitions or woolen curtains. This created a room within a room effect, which provided additional warmth and privacy. The hearth, located in the center, was the main source of heat, but its location was such that the heat could be evenly distributed around the perimeter, reaching the sleeping platforms. The smoke from the hearth also gave off some of its heat before escaping through an opening in the roof. The Viking bed system is a striking example of how everyday needs shaped architectural solutions. Their homes were designed to make the most of available materials and the laws of physics to provide warmth and comfort. It was not just construction, but a clever engineering solution adapted to the conditions of the north. We can see that a Viking bed was not just a pile of straw, but a complex, well-thought-out, multi-layered system, perfectly adapted to the harsh Scandinavian climate. The combination of straw as insulation, wool for softness, and sea animal skins for waterproofing created a highly effective and warm bed. These simple but ingenious techniques allowed them to maintain the health and strength necessary for their grand expeditions and the construction of their world. In an era when survival depended on the ability to use every available resource, the Vikings turned sheep sheppings and seal skins into the key to their success. Their legacy is not only sagas and drakars, but also lessons in practical wisdom that prove that human ingenuity can overcome even the most severe frost. Which of the Viking solutions for keeping warm do you think is the most ingenious? Was it the multifunctional flooring in the longhouse or the waterproof skin on the drakar? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.